that there's a lot of information about you when you ask a question. There's a lot of information that I would need to treat a patient in my office. I'm always the why guy. I want to know why, what, history. The more information I have, the better I'm going to serve my patients. So everything I offer is education so that you can take that information and ask your caregivers. And what I'll talk about today is, of course, hemisphericity and how it relates to the, how would you say, the cause, the effect, worsening, or how to get it better, how hemisphericity is involved in addictive behavior. We will start with this talk. We will start today with two important definitions that will lay the foundation for the rest of the talk. And right after these two definitions, we will jump into the meat of the talk, halal, of course, and discuss three important brain areas involved with addiction, then ending with any questions you may have. And I would recommend, as the sister was saying, write down or send Sister Layla questions while I'm talking so that you don't forget something, so that you can, your question, if I stir something, that question will be more specific if you ask it or write it down as soon as it comes to you, rather than later trying to remember the why of why you want to know. Now, the first part of this, two definitions, hugely important. The first one is really cool: interhemispheric rivalry or competition, or what we call lateral inhibition. This is when one area is actively doing something while the opposite area is actually opposing it and being inhibited. If they're balanced, for example, while I'm talking, I want to be really focused on the topic. I want to be really focused on the ideas that I wrote and the information I want to share. So that's my left brain, right? Left hemisphere, focusing on the details, focusing on the here and now. At the same time, my right hemisphere may be thinking or want to move into bigger ideas and sidetracking. And if y'all have been listening to me for any length of time, you know I can give you a whole bunch of explanations, and I overtalk sometimes about certain ideas and sections. So imagine, to stay focused then, both of these have to be working together in the sense that my left brain is really focused on the topic of tonight. And my right brain, if there's a balance, hopefully, my right brain is then inhibiting all these competing thoughts and ideas, or what we may lead into next week, or maybe we should shift over to more Quran again and more brain, or whatever takes place. So my left brain is trying to focus down, and my right brain is actually inhibiting itself to move into big ideas, but it's also inhibiting those competing ideas. So even though I talk about overactive one side and underactive the other, or whatever's taking place there, they are both active in what they are doing at the same time. I might be having a big idea, the left side kicks in and it starts thinking about little details to fill in with that big idea. So they're both active, but I'm still more right brain at thinking about big ideas, year-long goals and all that. And then when we start pursuing individual things like preparing for this lecture, rather than typing up a whole bunch of ideas on other topics, I stayed focused and finished the talk. So that's where we talk about interhemispheric rivalry or competition, and also lateral inhibition, if that makes sense. And also addiction. The topic of tonight, addiction, is the simple definition is aberrant or abnormal habit formation. Keep it simple: abnormal habit formation, whether it's a drug addiction, an alcohol addiction, cigarette addiction. How many people that you may know have to have a cigarette after the meal. Or, I mean, that's just a habit. That's not, oh my gosh, every time you eat, you need more nicotine, or all the harmful products that are in cigarettes. That's not what food didn't stimulate that. It's a habit you have. So, addictive behaviors, a simple definition would be aberrant or abnormal habit formation, because this is a habit you have formed. And we'll talk about 3 different brain areas that are really important for habit formation. The first brain area, again, dealing with hemisphericity, most addictive behavior is an overactive or left hemispheric problem with an underactive right hemisphere. And it could be an underactive right hemisphere, allowing the left to pursue these short-term goals. And we'll talk about more the left behavior in specific in a moment. But imagine if your left or your right hemisphere is not inhibiting anything, especially bad behavior, right? Your right hemisphere is not active. It's not active enough. So it's not inhibiting those aberrant or abnormal habits, especially unhealthy habits, right? Now, let's talk about the left hemisphere. And most of you, this will just be a short review because most of you have heard my hemisphericity talk before, my left hemisphere and my right hemisphere. So I'm just going to quickly review this for those who may be new or as a reminder for all of us. First of all, the left hemisphere, the left brain is really the approach behavior, the initiation, and the go side. The right hemisphere, avoidance, inhibition. Okay. So here you got, of course, initiating. If I can't ramp down the initiation, then I'm going to always be doing something, whether it's good or bad. Left brain emotions are happy, surprise, and anger. Those can be good emotions in the sense that you're happy you achieved it, you're surprised when you didn't, and you're angry or frustrated, and you push through it to achieve your goal. At first, the experiment didn't work, but you tweak it a little bit, and now you get a result, and you've learned something new. When the left side is totally out of control, you can see a real good example of abnormal left hemisphere or uncontrolled left hemisphericity in the newly elected white guy that really can't inhibit anything, right? He's only happy when he gets his way. He's surprised when he doesn't. And he gets so angry, rude, and he just pushes harder and louder and harder and louder because there's no inhibition. There's no social awareness. There's no awareness of anything else. He's never had an idea that he didn't like, right? They're all great ideas, and that's one of his favorite words. But that's a really good example of really bad left hemisphericity. Right behind that, you've got a left brain. When you're focused on getting something done, this would be a good thing. They don't care about connecting. You're focused on getting your project done, and that's the group goal, right? The bad thing is if you don't care about connecting, how easy is it to pursue these abnormal or aberrant habit formations like drugs, alcohol, the hypersexuality, watching videos all the time, looking at the internet all the time. Okay, there's no personal connection there. The left brain doesn't care about connecting. It's really important. The left brain is goal driven, usually very short-term goals, very pleasure-seeking driven. It's very self-involved. It has to be stimulated to come on. The right brain is when it's normal, the right brain is always on. The right brain is aware. The right brain is looking. The right brain is inhibition and avoidance. The right brain is always looking to be safe. Is it a safe environment? Is it a safe thing to do? Do I fit in with society or within the norms of this particular society? Whatever the society is, you want to fit in, because centuries ago, even today, we are wired to fit in with our group, because left alone, we may not survive. So the right brain is trying to fit in, the left brain doesn't. The right brain really wants to be connected. The left brain doesn't care about connection. And you can see how those would work together with addictive behavior. If this is rammed down, it doesn't care about being connected. It doesn't care about its behavior. It doesn't care whether it fits in. And the left brain is always looking for stimulation. It's looking for a reason to turn on. Movement, moving around, fidgety kids, when we talked about ADHD, even mentally moving around and jumping around. The left brain is not wired to connect. It's very goal directed. It's reward reinforced. Reward reinforced. Seeking behavior, ego or self-driven, acquire and accumulate stuff. It's all about itself. And with that left brain being reward driven and detail oriented and short-term goals, now you can, if you're thinking about it, now you can see how that pleasure seeking fits in also. Reward driven, pleasure can be a reward. Reward seeking, goal driven behavior. So now the goal becomes seeking the reward or the pleasure in this case. Video games, what they call the doom scrolling with the different social medias, that is wired to give you a quick hit right now. Boom, boom, boom. Their algorithms are wired to grab attention now. They use the colors, they plan this out, the videos using music, whatever they can to grab that immediate attention, even to the point of colors. Look at the background and the scheme, and you can see what emotions they're trying to create. Dopamine and acetylcholine, and you can look these up later, very pleasure seeking. And even though it's universal, if I say something, don't take it as I mean there's only dopamine and only acetylcholine on the left side. But the left side and the left brain behavior is more dopamine and acetylcholine stimulant and pleasure, short-term pleasure, more short-term pleasure. Okay, the left brain is more dopamine and acetylcholine driven. And contrast that to the right, it's more serotonin driven, which is long-term happiness, okay? Long-term joy and pleasure, if that makes sense. Relationships, social connections, achieving long-term goals. And then we also look at the local attention and detail processing, left brain stuff, and pleasure-seeking behavior is more left brain, especially if you remember when we talked a week ago, 2 weeks ago, when we talked about the frontal cortex and the left brain, especially the left orbital frontal cortex areas right here in the front middle, Brodmann areas 11 and 12, which we talked about in earlier talks, and they are very related to the emotional control. The left brain and overactivity, even if it's not an addictive behavior, but I'll start with an addictive behavior so there's no contrast. OCD, obsessive-compulsive disorder. That could be obsessive thoughts or obsessive-compulsive behavior, couldn't it? You have to touch the door 3 times or something horrible is going to happen. You have a routine. You have to make sure it's locked 15 times. You have to go back and make sure you turn the iron off or the stove off. You haven't even cooked today, but when you leave the house, you have to go back and click, 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 check all the stove things. You could be, like I said, the left brain likes to accumulate things. You could be someone that you replace cleaning supply. I know someone, I have a relative that has probably a year's worth of cleaning supplies in his closet. He literally has all the hand cleaners, he has kitchen cleaners, he has toilet cleaners, all of it for years at a time. And if he replaces one, he has to replace a lot. It's obsessive compulsive behavior, decreased inhibition, decreased right brain. Also, Tourette's, obsessive motor behavior, muscular. Tics, obsessive motor and muscular behavior. Addictive behaviors, and I'll run through a list in a few minutes, but addictive behaviors, we have to strengthen the right brain, obviously, and improve the inhibition. Motor tics and Tourette's and other motor disorders are usually a hyper left brain with dopamine and acetylcholine. And they also involve, if you're the type to look it up, there's something called the direct left brain, and then the indirect, and believe it or not, with this name, hyperdirect. Those are both on the right. So when your brain fires, and I use my hands a lot. So when I'm firing to do a movement, the direct pathway says after it's all cleared, the movement happens. So the direct pathway fires and everything starts. I point, and then at the same time, but along a longer path, but splits hardly seconds, right? Split seconds apart. It stops. Indirect and hyperdirect work on inhibiting things. So rather than me doing this, which I want to happen, I might, and my hand flings into the screen and I break it and I'm upset. So what happens is they both fire at the same time. Imagine if this, when we talk about addictive behaviors, if the inhibitory, the indirect and the hyperdirect pathways aren't working well, they're decreased. Now addictive behaviors in the orbital frontal cortex with emotions and actions, but a lot of emotional. So you've got this emotional attachment, over emotional attachment to something, right? Is not inhibited. Then we can also develop things like left brain anxiety, believe it or not, left brain or right brain. Right brain is more fear-based, more avoidance and inhibition. Fear something horrible is going to happen, you're scared. Left brain is more obsessive behavior, ritualistic stuff. And we talked about this 2 weeks ago, the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, right? You've got, and particularly with increased compulsive behavior, there's increased left side, right? Left hemisphere, orbital frontal cortex, the left of 11 and 12. And then that tells us that even if this was running normal, pretend we did an MRI scan, you do all those different scans, PET scans to see levels of activity, QEEGs. And rather than maybe this measures out normal, but if the right brain is deficient, that could lead to obsessive thoughts and obsessive actions because you're not inhibiting anything. And if it can't be inhibited, it can't be controlled, right? And that creates the anxiety. You can't even control your thoughts, all right, let alone actions. And then remember, the left brain is not, it's on all the time. Don't make that too general, but left brain taking over is a transitory thing. So imagine if your right brain is deficient and that go, go, go comes on, then it's constantly looking for more and more stimulation and a reason to be on because the right brain is not inhibiting it the way it should be, if that makes sense. And we also want to look at the basal ganglia. And actually, those are the three things we're going to talk about today in summary. We've got the left hemisphere, the orbital frontal cortex we've talked about before, both of those. And I'm going to introduce the basal ganglia. And that's the third brain idea, which will close our talk. And that'll lead us right into our questions and answers. And the basal ganglia, the first thing you want to remember about that, and I'll mention it again, is that's where habit formation takes place. Basal ganglia. Now, the second area, which we already led into, is the orbital frontal cortex of the frontal lobe. We talked about the orbital frontal cortex during our discussion about the Quranic verses in chapter 96, El-Alaq, I believe. If I'm wrong, you can correct me later. Chapter 96, verses 15 and 16, when we talk about the lying, sinning forelock, because these are not, particularly the right side, these are not inhibiting that behavior. So, of course, you're pulled out here because that's also the left side is where it's initiated, right, on those two areas. And then the right side is where you're trying to inhibit the bad stuff. That's why I love the hadith from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that if you intend to commit a sin, but you don't do it, you inhibit it, you get 2 rewards, 2 or more. If you commit a sin, you only get 1 punishment, right? So we were initiating it. For me, from a brain point of view, we were initiating it. That's 1. And then 2, we inhibited it. At least 2 rewards because we took 2 actions. Holy cow, I had the thought, whoop, I inhibited it. I didn't do it. So it's just, for me, it's something that subtle. It may not be the way a scholar would explain it, but I just thought it was cool. It just feels that way. Now, let's look at some of the orbital frontal, particularly the left, right? Particularly the left, orbital frontal cortex problems. And this same list, it applies to the left side frontal cortex, but in particular, the orbital frontal cortex on the left. ADHD is increased right, decreased left. Hyperactivity, now we're getting into it. Hyperactivity, increased left, decreased right. Hypersexuality, increased left, decreased right. Obsessive behavior, whether it's behavior or thoughts, increased left, decreased right. Anger, increased left, that's where anger lives, on the left. Decreased right. Anxiety, usually if it's an emotional anxiety, even though I said there's a left brain anxiety, a left brain anxiety is more, you're worried about getting everything done because you're so left side dominant. Oh, I got to get this list. Oh my God, I didn't get it done. Oh my God, something bad's going to happen. Or right brain anxiety, which is the more numerous, more people demonstrate right brain anxiety. That's usually decreased left brain, because good things about the left brain are initiation, about logic, sequential thoughts, sequential actions, sequential behaviors. Right brain anxiety is fear. Right brain doesn't have a timeline. The right brain doesn't sequence things. So the emotion takes over and you don't left brain logic it out. So a right brain anxiety would be decreased left, increased right. But then left brain anxiety is anxious about not accomplishing everything and not getting everything done. And you get worked up about it. Your thoughts, it's nonstop. A little bit of research points towards males tend to be more left brain anxiety and their thoughts just get running. But I know plenty of you sisters, you don't have to type it in. Plenty of you have the same issues. So that's a left brain thing when you just can't shut things down. Right brain is more fear of something unknown happening. And there's no timeline or no left brain logic to it. Depression, right? You got anger, let's start with happiness, surprise, and anger. No depression. It's initiation. It's go. It's angry. I'm going to push through it no matter what, whether I'm right or wrong. Right brain. So depression is generally a decreased left and increased right. Passiveness or no motivation, decreased left, increased right. But you can see the addictive behaviors tend to be the left brain. You've got hyperactivity, hypersexuality, obsessive compulsive, whether it's emotions or behavior, those all tend to be an increased right and a lack of inhibition. Now, in the orbital frontal cortex and also the temporal lobes on both sides, because there's some emotional, the insula is very important, and you can look that up later. The anterior cingulate cortex, we talked about that 2 weeks ago. Both of those have very strong emotional ties for and help us with motivation. When we're emotionally involved, we tend to get things done, whether it's run away in fear, fight or flight, or run through the wall because we want to win the game kind of thing. The orbital frontal cortex in the middle, the temporal lobes, and especially orbital frontal, that's 11 and 12, right? 10, 11, and 12. 10's involved also with the prefrontal, the frontal polar area. This is where empathy, civility, and socially appropriate behavior live, particularly on the right. This is also really important, believe it or not. Here's some things. Recognizing familiar faces. If you can recognize a familiar face, that leads us right into facial emotions and being able to read other people and see how our behavior is influencing society and influencing the people around us. And if we're concerned, good balance, we initiate a behavior, we measure the behavior to see if we fit in and we're being polite to everybody around us. Left brain, what did I say? Left brains don't need that connection. So they usually don't pay attention to facial cues. Then we also have tone of voice, what we call prosody. Whether I ramp it up, ramp it down, whether that ramp it up is excited joining with one another, or maybe I ramp it up and it's anger, right? And we've got to measure all of that, voice prosody. Understanding, and that leads us right into understanding other people's intentions and other people's emotions from body posture, gestures, and movements. Problems here short circuit the ability to correctly perceive another person's or other people's nonverbal signals. And it really, really, really compromises our ability to connect to people. And then when we're talking hyperactive left brain or inhibited right, either one, that inability to connect really moves us over to why not pursue our addictive behaviors? Because we're not concerned with how the other people feel, whether it's in a marriage and the spouse hates the fact that you're downstairs looking at pornography all the time and achieving those short-term, whatever, dopamine, acetylcholine stimulations, whether it's alcohol, whether it's drugs, whether it's abusive behavior, because you only get anger and you don't inhibit that. And your long-term goal, if you're in a marriage, is to, remember, we're Muslims. Your long-term goal is actually to make it to Jannah. And as Muslims, we don't say, and there's an Arabic phrase for it, we don't say till death do us part. We really, really, really believe in heaven and hell. So you're married in this life. Inshallah, you will be married in the next life. Whatever Allah blesses us with, this is not a till death do us part thing. So connecting and pleasing the other people, the other person in our relationship, the spouse. My kids and I, when we talk about things, one of the things I say is, you want to compete, you want someone to compete with you in kindness. If you can literally find someone that treats you kinder than you treat them, and don't try to undershoot it by, oh, I want them to treat me kinder, so I'm going to be rude and obnoxious all the time. That's not going to get you any blessings. And Allah may bless them with someone better in Jannah, and you're not there. The idea is competing for kind acts, kindness to each other. I wouldn't want to be married and have any of my good deeds have to be transferred to my spouse, right? That's it. But if she beats me in kindness, Allah knows best. There she goes, right? And if our goal is to out-kind each other, out-respect each other, out-good behavior stuff, that helps us, right? Brain, big picture, earning heaven, right? That big picture then helps to inhibit the anger and the distress that addictive behaviors cause. I know it's not this simple. Allah knows best. But if that right brain is deficient, and we're not doing anything to stimulate the right brain, then the left brain will always be in charge. And as I said, short-term pleasure-seeking, not connected behavior, thoughts, everything, right? Short-term, achieving, immediate, goal-driven, reward-seeking behavior. Now, let's jump into the third area, as I mentioned briefly a moment ago.
No, hold on. Everything you just mentioned,
Mom, I'm so glad you're here.
Sorry, I am very cold here in Philadelphia.
Sorry.
Everything you mentioned, Brother Abdul Rahman, everything in the Quran. Racing each other, Surah Al-Mutaffifin. وفي ذلك فليتنافس المتنافسون. In the matter of the Jannah, we competing between each other. Husband, wife, brother and sisters, everybody competing to go to the top of the Jannah. That's Allah mentioned that in the Quran. Plus, husband, wife, and this and that, Allah mentioned that in the Quran, many ayat, especially Surah Al-Rum, ayah number 21. Surah Al-Rum, Allah said, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. Allahu Akbar. Not only love overnight, it's gone. But the mawadda always there. The mawadda that respect, number one is the respect. honor each other, respect each other and honor each other. That is mawadda, and accept my opinion, the dispute between each other. That Allah mentioned in the Quran. So everything we mention in the Quran, the key, brother Abdul Rahman, Jazakallah khair, if we really follow what Allah Azza wa Jal said, our household, calm, peace, tranquility is the key. If understand the word of Allah Azza wa Jal.
Exactly.
Yes.
And it's so, and again, that what you just mentioned, that's why it's in the back of my head, because I probably learned it from you, mashallah, all those years in Boca.
Yes. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, go to the point. I'm sorry. I'm listening now, inshallah. Sorry about that. Sorry.
No, brother, just hearing you always brings me this joy, if you can't tell.
Alhamdulillah. Me too, brother. When I listen to subhanallah, so we have just very cold here, but I'm just listening. But when I mention Quran and what Allah said, I have to interrupt.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just
Yeah.
like about it.
Alhamdulillah.
Now let's
Right.
talk.
Yeah.
Now we'll talk about the basal ganglia. Remember what I said earlier. The basal ganglia in the middle of your head, it's like right there, right in the front of it, right, literally like right here. The reason its locations are important to me is because I use a lot of red and near infrared, red infrared light for therapy to give the cells energy to improve the brain neurons, blah, 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 blah. So forgive me for pointing to my head all the time. As I said earlier, the basal ganglia is hugely important because this is where habits are formed. Once you do it often enough, and that's hugely important for developing new habits. When you do it often enough, you don't even have to think about the motor skills that are required. It just happens. For example, if you all say you're in a bigger city and you take a bus, you know what time you have to be at the bus stop. You know how long it takes you without even thinking about it. You get dressed, you eat your breakfast, you made your salah, you eat your breakfast, you go down to get ready for get your ride for work. I go out to the car, I have to drive a little bit. I know, boom, 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 throw my book bag very gently in the car. I sit down, I turn the guy back up. I usually back up and go that way. Then I'm driving. I know the path I'm taking. I don't even think about it. But when I first started going to this job location, I had to guesstimate, okay, is it 15 minutes? Is it 20 minutes? Is it now I might glance at the clock on my dashboard and I know exactly how much more time I have before I get to the office. So this is the habitual formation. I'm literally driving and thinking, and I know I'm going to slow down right about here because as I go over this little overpass, the traffic that comes onto the highway right there, the people are cutting across 2 and 3 lanes. These are all habit. I don't need to see the cars coming across. I'm already slowing down. Does that make sense? So that's all in the basal ganglia. Something real simple is teaching young children how to tie shoes. You know, you're walking them through the whole story. I don't even know how I learned how to tie my shoes. But I've heard other parents say they're dealing with a rabbit and they wrap around a tree and they poke it through a hole and there's the other loop or something, right? And you walk the child through enough that eventually they start doing it. They talk to themselves. And then if you ask me how I tie my shoes, I'd literally have to untie it and talk to you a step at a time because the habit is in my basal ganglia and I don't even think about it anymore. And then that tells my motor functions and that tells me what to do. That's your basal ganglia. And remember now how this is influenced. If your left basal ganglia and your left brain is in charge, now you've got these addictive behaviors, aberrant, abnormal habit formation has formed in your basal ganglia, and your right is not inhibiting it. I like to eat, but the staff at my office will say, it's amazing how much you control your appetite. Well, I know I like to eat, but I've developed a habit to eat very little, and sometimes, and they all know, oh, I say, what day is it? It's Monday. And I say, what happens on Monday? And they say, you fast, inshallah. I fast many Mondays. There's a hadith that I was taught. by someone who doesn't need to be mentioned. That the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told, I believe it was Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, that one of the three things he gave him pieces of advice was to fast 3 days a month. I usually do that, inshallah, on Mondays because I've eaten well over the weekend. I've exercised. I've done everything. Monday's usually a busy day, so I usually don't exercise that morning. I'll get up, I'll fast. I may even type on a Monday morning. Those are the habits, right? That's basal ganglia. And the less you have to think about it, the more habits, correct habits in the basal ganglia can save you time, make you more efficient, and get things done. Now think about this. With that, where, like I said, we're talking about OCD, abnormal habit formation. We're talking about tics, abnormal movement behavior. Tourette's, abnormal verbal movement behaviors. Most anxiety disorders, left, other than the fearful on the right, food disorders, sexual disorders, all of this can be found in the basal ganglia. And this can be, like I mentioned earlier, this can be indicative of an overactive left brain direct pathway, or it can be an underactive, indirect or hyperdirect right hemisphere pathway, right? What we have to do is we have to look at a simple one is imagine someone's a smoker. Absolutely, I hate smoking. The idea is they always say, oh my gosh, I have to have that cigarette after a meal. That's a habit. Like I said, there's nothing in there physically other than a habit. So what you can do, if something like smoking, say you wanted to stop, first thing you have to do is decrease. So now what you're going to do is you're going to immediately after food, you usually go outside or you smoke in your house, all that stuff. What you could do is literally put it off and talk to your spouse and children or your family, whatever it is. If you live alone, form a new habit. Do something like 5 squats in your chair right after your food, easy stuff. Do push-ups on the floor if you want to be more in better shape. Anything. Do a plank, anything. Postpone it for 5 minutes. Break the immediacy of that habit. And now you are starting to break the immediacy and break the importance, not immediacy. Breaking the immediacy will help you break the importance of that habit because now you're creating other steps in it. Imagine you're someone that's addicted to porn. And I know it's not this simple. Please be patient with me, but imagine you're addicted to porn, astaghfirullah, and you go downstairs or you leave the room so that your spouse and your kids can't see you, but everybody knows what's taking place. And you do it at a certain time every night or a certain time every day or a certain time. Well, don't do it at that time. Put it off for another 5 minutes, another 10 minutes. Yeah, you can feel anxiety. You can feel anxious because there's this habit formed, but it's not going to kill you to wait 5 minutes. Pretend that you are literally trying to please your spouse, please your family, and even more so, you're pleasing Allah by doing all of that. So what you've got to do is get that right brain more active, set that big picture goal, and you don't have to walk away. Cold turkey is hard. Some people do it, most people don't. But break the basal ganglia cycle, break that habit formation of at this time, at this, okay? Something simple like my habits in the morning, going to work. I'm usually talking to my mother, and I know if we talk this long, I'm not worried about what time I get to the office. But sometimes Mom and I talk about this long. Now, even though we have a great time, alhamdulillah, that brings it close, right? So I know based on my habits, like that short timing, I know it doesn't compare to cigarettes, alcohol, and hypersexuality, but literally I have my habits, my movements, my behavior in the morning. And again, it's habitual. Now, with that in mind, the basal ganglia and, like I mentioned before, the right prefrontal cortex, in particular the orbital frontal cortex, This is usually the problem area for OCD and tics. And there can also be an underactive right prefrontal cortex. So, of course, I do a lot of laser. I do a lot of right brain, left body. Remember, we talked about that before. A lot of right brain, left body, because that stuff crosses over, left visual field, right nostril for smell, facial behavior, hearing crosses over. A lot of left body stimulation for right brain strengthening and stimulation. Because right brain is inhibition, and we can't have a deficient right brain when we're talking about breaking up bad habits. Basal ganglia also includes 3 different areas, and these are really important. There's a term we use, co-activation. And I'm going to tell you what these 3 areas do, 4 areas. You don't have to remember exactly, but I'm going to tell you these 4 areas. And then we'll close and all the questions and answers, and we'll stay right here. Hugely important, basal ganglia co-activate, or you do at the same time, along with what I do, a lot of red light, but you can do movement and sound, whatever you want to do, visual activity. Co-activate with complicated coordinated activities, complicated coordinated activities. Believe it or not, movement. Believe it or not, doing an infinity sign, and I'll do a tight one. So I'm going horizontal, or you can go vertical. And if you could see my leg, I demonstrate it with that because that's a larger muscle group. And it's not as finely detailed movement as your hand is. So your hand is used to performing these tight things, right? Doing it with your leg, you could do a gigantic infinity sign or a figure 8. That's considered complicated coordinated movement, or dribbling, or playing catch. All of this with the left hand while you're stimulating the left side with a TENS unit or something, if you don't have a pacemaker. But that's what I'm talking about when I talk about complicated coordinated movement. Now, you got something called, listen to the descriptions of these, not so much the name, but I'll tell you. The caudate, part of the basal ganglia. The caudate, emotional and cognitive types of behaviors. The putamen, more involved in motor activity with some regulation of behavior. The globus pallidus, subconscious influence of motor control, mainly inhibitory. To balance, the cerebellum, because that's hugely important in motor control, smooth movement, smooth thoughts. Cerebellum back here is really important. And the basal ganglia and the cerebellum, along with the frontal cortex, along with everything, they interact. Your brain just interacts with itself, right? Left, right, front, back, all the different areas. But the globus pallidus is really important because that's subconscious influence of motor control, and it tries to inhibit any inappropriate stuff based on the previous habits you formed. But that's going to try to inhibit the cerebellum and the excitatory influence it has. So you want a strong globus pallidus to inhibit the cerebellum, making your addictive behavior and movements towards that. You want to interfere with that. And then you have the nucleus accumbens. That's your area of the basal ganglia that actually gives you the motivation to act. So let's stimulate the right, act in a good way, or inhibit the left bad actions. And then with these descriptions, you can see how the basal ganglia, and as we talked about with the brainstem, if one area is off, stimulate the other areas. You can see how using different areas in the basal ganglia, the caudate, the putamen, and the globus pallidus, how you can use movements to discipline yourself emotionally and physically, right? So now, with all of that information, let's cover some questions, even though I took longer than 30 minutes again.